the bad conditions at home country, adverse conditions at home country. So, what are those factors which attract people? Those factors can be any sort of factor. These factors differ person to person, community to community, because everyone has one's own reason for migration, one's own reason for leaving their homeland. So, these reasons differ community to community, society to society, people to people. Normally, the pull factors are better prospects for a career, better educational or health facilities, better quality of life, personal safety, and more income, good paying jobs. Whereas push factors can be adverse or bad economic conditions at home, inferior facilities of health and education, degraded quality of life, and of course, political instability, including conflict and war or political persecution, which is the strongest reason for diaspora, political persecution. So now let's talk about some of the important diasporic groups. Jewish diaspora. As we all know that Jews under Moses were among the first such people who were forced to leave their land, who were pushed out of their land for some political reasons. And Jewish diaspora was the movement of Jews from their homeland and settling up at various places. In this diaspora, Jewish diaspora was it was known as Assyrian exile, which started in 733 BC, and it subsisted for several centuries. After moving from their own land, after leaving their land, the Jews divided into some groups based on the geographical locations. It means some of the Jews they settled at one place, whereas others settled at some different place. And every group, each group shared some basic historical issues of persecution and expulsions. Wherever they settled, all these groups had some or the other historical issues. Another important diaspora is African diaspora. The Africans were forcibly pushed out of their land and they settled in USA, in the USA during the notorious slavery days in the 16th century. Basically, African diaspora started in the 8th century when Arabs took they took Africans from the central and the eastern areas of the continent, and these people were called Zani. The Arab they captured those Africans from those central and eastern parts, and they sold them in the markets of Middle East and Indian subcontinent. This was all happening in the 8th century. So African diaspora basically began in 8th century. After that, by the 15th century, Europeans also started doing the same thing. They also captured African slaves and they started selling them in the markets of Europe and America. So this slave trade ended in the 20th century. The third important diaspora is African diaspora, Irish diaspora. The Irish people were forced to leave home and settle elsewhere during the infamous potato famine in Ireland. During that time, approximately 2 million people escaped from Ireland to America and Canada. Around 2 million people escaped from Ireland to America and Canada. and but most of the people who ran away from their homeland, they couldn't survive. And the people who moved towards America, and the people who moved towards America, they were with no money and no food to eat. The ships which carried these people, those ships were in so bad conditions, in such a bad condition that those they were dubbed as coffin ships. Around 30,000 Irish people landed in Canada and strengthened its workforce by working for low wages. So these were the Irish people who supported Canadian economy by working in the projects of bridges, in the projects of building construction, etc. So these were three major diasporas. Let's talk about Indian diaspora and its various forms. In short, let's talk about Indian diaspora and its various forms. The formation of Indian communities abroad began in a big way only in the 19th century under the British rule, when the uh, British were ruling India. Under their colonial policy, they took Indians for their own purpose when they started some other colonies, and to develop those other colonies, they focused on taking the labor force from their existing colonies. So when they needed to develop the places where they were focusing on some specific agricultural products, then, and specifically cash crops, something which was being done here in India, and for a millennia, and Indians were very adept at producing such kind of crops, so they took the labor force from here. For this, they selected the regions of Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, where sugarcane had been produced for a long time. And again, people from the same region, same the people from these regions were taken to Mauritius Island. Excuse me. And again, after Mauritius, this people from the same regions were taken to Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, and even Suriname in Caribbean islands in Latin America, and then later to the Fiji Island. They selected the same region for the same reasons. They chose those regions because the people living in those areas, in the people living in Uttar Pradesh, part of the Uttar Pradesh, as well as the people living in Bihar, they were adept at producing such kind of crops, so they selected those people so that they can be useful for them in developing those agricultural areas of other colonies of theirs. So, as V.S. Naipaul has also quoted about this migration to Fiji Island, he said that the journey to the Fiji Islands was the last journey of those people, was their last journey. Means the people who went to those places, they never came back. So this was the first Indian diaspora, which is known as Bhojpuri diaspora. The reason behind calling it Bhojpuri diaspora is that uh, these people belong to the place called Bhojpur, and the language which they spoke was called Bhojpuri. Because of their language, that diaspora was called Bhojpuri diaspora. Now, the second form of Indian diaspora, it is called Girmitiyas. So why do they? Why was it called Girmitia diaspora? Excuse me. So when the British colonized Sri Lanka and the Malaya Peninsula, the climate there was more conducive to growing rubber, and therefore it was decided to start rubber plantation, for which labor force was brought from the erstwhile Madras region, currently comprising Tamil Nadu and Kerala. So this time they had selected another region of India. They chose people from Tamil Nadu and Kerala because these people were expert in growing rubber, expert in rubber plantation. But it was not always to develop agriculture, but this time they took people from these places for rubber plantation, and they were called girmitias because the people who were taken from there, from those regions, they were taken under an agreement. Initially that agreement was for 5 years, and at the end of which they were promised to be that they would be free, and they were also given the choice, if they want they would exceed that agreement. So in their Bhojpuri parlance they called that agreement as girmit. So the people who went under that girmit, they called themselves as girmitias. So this was the second form of diaspora. I think I am running short of time. So the third form is Kangni diaspora. This was called Kangni diaspora because this time they chose people from the Punjab region, and this time these people were taken from there for not for the agriculture, but for some other reasons, and that other reason was to lay a railway line from the coast of Mombasa to the Lake Victoria. And they chose a person, a man who was known as Kangni, and the work of selecting the people or selecting the workers was given to that Kangni. That's why that kind of diaspora system was called Kangni diaspora system. Now let's talk in short about Indian diaspora in Canada. Indian diaspora, Europeans were the first people to see this vast land from the 16th century onwards. They sent their ships to the east coast for the fishing, and then comes French, who colonized Canada in the 19th century. But when British occupied it, they occupied a part of Canada, and then afterwards British ousted the French, and then Canada became their colony, and Canada became free in 1867 only. So later on, we can say that initially Canada was ruled by the British, the French, the Irish, and the German. When they needed workforce, when they needed human force, human resources, they started bringing people some other European countries. For example, Russia, Hungary, and some of the Ukrainians were also there. They all migrated to Canada. When the need increased, a huge labor force was needed, then they needed non-Europeans. This was the time when non-Europeans were induced to come to Canada and settle there. So this time Chinese, the Japanese, the Korean, and some other East Asian were brought to Canada. It was only in the beginning of the 20th century that Indians were brought to Canada, particularly physically strong Indians or physically strong Punjabis. They were motivated to come to Canada and settle there. So this was the unskilled diaspora, and the pull factor which worked there was a lure into good salary and better prospect of life. And the push factor which worked there was the problems which these Punjabis or these Sikhs were facing in their home country. There were higher taxes, they had less land, and some natural disasters were also there. They suffered plague, there was famine. So these were the push factors which forced them to leave their own country and go to a new land. So they were unskilled people. Now the skilled diaspora. Afterwards, when the skilled people started coming to Canada, when this and these skilled people went to Canada voluntarily. This was voluntary diaspora. They went there on the promise of good life, on the promise of good salary. But when they reached there, they were given low salaries, extra work hours were there, their living and working conditions were very poor, no proper food was available, and moreover, they faced some racist and hostile behavior. And this racist and hostile behavior from the host people resulted in some kinds of protest against these Indians. And because of the protest of the Canadians, because of the protest of these host people against the migrants, the Canadian government had to ban the Indian immigration, and there was a ban on Indian immigration from 1908 till 1947. This ban was systematically and slowly dismantled. Let's talk about diaspora writings, how these diaspora writings are different from the normal writings. The very first thing which we find in diaspora writing is the theme of alienation, a concept of rerouting, and cultural clash versus assimilation. These writings talk about alienation. The characters of these writings, the characters from the novels, from diasporic novels, from the stories, or even the poems, these characters find themselves totally alienated from the host country. They find it hard to mix up with the people of the host country. These writings also talk about the reluctance to adapt with the new situations, to accept the new situations. And these writings also show the hostility on the part of the host. The very important thing which we find in these writings is that they talk about the cultural clash, which normally we do not find in other sort of writings. Because when a person who is in diaspora, when that person writes about the host country, normally these diasporic writers take up the characters from their homeland, or they take the theme from their homeland, or their story talks about their homeland. So the characters or the theme or the story or the life in the homeland is obviously quite contrary to their host country. So that's why they successfully create a cultural clash. Another important thing about diasporic writing is that when these seeds of diasporic writings started, these seeds were through the letters which the community members sent home, describing both the living and working conditions as well as their emotional states. So while talking about the writing women, I feel that it is important to talk about the term gender. Gender is not something with which we are born with. It is a term which is given by the society. It has its various facets. It's not something we are born with. Rather, what we do and how we behave, it becomes our gender. So, but the thing is that whenever this term is used, in our common
इसमें कुछ
parlance,
पढ़े कि नहीं आप इसमें भी? हाँ?
it is perceived that gender means a female or feminine, or it is an equivalent of feminism. But the term gender refers to both males and females. So as we know that males and females, they perceive reality, they perceive things differently, and this difference is visible in their writings as well. The diasporic writings of Indian origin, the diasporic writings by the women of Indian origin are totally different from the diasporic writing of males of the Indian origin. And the difference is specifically of style of narration. Both of them talk about alienation, both of them talk about discrimination, ethnicity, cultural conflict, cultural clash, cultural assimilation, cultural acceptance, nostalgia. Similar themes have been taken by both, but these same themes are dealt in different ways. So when we talk about the diaspora writers from South Asian diaspora writers from Canada, the first thing we see is that the writers, South Asian writers in Canada or anywhere in the world, the beginning of this diasporic writing belongs to the men, or the men or the male writers are someone who started this diasporic writing. The reason is quite obvious that those were the men only who were taken as workers or laborers, or men were the first to migrate from their homeland to a new country, to a new land. And the people who went to a new country, to a new land, those, they were not even educated, they were not uh, they did not know how to write or read even. They had to depend upon others, just if they needed to send a letter back home, which also happened very rarely, then also they had to depend on others. So so later on, when there was when they started educating themselves, when there was there was an educated generation, then they started writing also. And it was the men who were who gained access to education before the women. So that's why those were the men only who started writing first. To name a few, whenever we talk about diasporic writing, the very first name that comes to our minds is Salman Rushdie. Then we have the name of V.S. Naipaul. And these names are very famous. Everybody knows about Salman Rushdie's book Midnight's Children, and V.S. Naipaul's An Area of Darkness. So the women writing came quite late. But when they started writing, they made up for that late start. So, what are the important things which we find in the South Asian Canadian female writers? The first thing that they highlight is that they are doubly marginalized. This is about the writers in general, not specifically about the female writers. They are doubly marginalized. The first thing, they are immigrants, then they are minorities. Now, the South Asian Canadian women writers, they are marginalized first as an immigrant, as a minority, and then as a woman, marginalized at home as well. The works of South Asian writers and poets speak about alienation, stings of racism, religious bigotry, pains of daily realities, and regular struggles of adjustments. And when we talk about the works of South Asian women writers, these women talk about alienation at two places: alienation when they are amongst or when they are with the people of host country, and they felt that or they experienced that alienation within their family as well. Dual experiences of alienation. Stings of racism, they felt, they experienced those stings of racism being as a woman, as a minority, as well as an immigrant. So the migrant women writers were also marginalized because generally writing was associated with migrant males, because it was the male who started educating themselves and who started learning new things and who started writing as well. Now let's talk about the text which I had selected for today's discussion. The very first text is A Letter for Home. It is a poem written by Himani Joshi. The things or the themes which Himani Joshi talks about in this poem are the feelings, emotions, and desires associated with the present land, the land where she is presently living, that is Canada. And at the same time, she highlights a wistful longing for the past. A complex view of the double vision is shown here. And this complex view of the double vision is experienced by most diasporic individuals as well as communities. A vision that is at the same time forward looking as well as looking back. So, this longing for the past is a part of human existential condition. No matter where one lived, even if one lived in the same place all one's life, one would look at the past, at lost moments, at lost opportunities, lost love, etc. So, longing for a past is a part of human nature. This is the basic thing which Himani Joshi has highlighted in this poem. I have selected a stanza from this poem. Here, Himani Joshi says that I do not bind my tresses in exile. A speck of ash lies on my full plate, and at night in bed, I feel the house vibrating with the life is still left throbbing in the earth where my umbilicus lies buried. So when Himani Joshi talks about I do not bind my tresses in exile, she refers to the well-known legend about the seer Chanakya who was insulted by the clan of King Nanda. I think the story is well known to each of us that Chanakya, being a Brahmin, he tied a part of his hair as a choti. And seeking revenge, he untied the knot and vowed to tie it again only after removing Nanda from the throne. And along with that, he would eat ash if he did not redeem his vow. So the poet also keeps her hair untied because of the insults heaped on her. Though she had not vowed any revenge or anything like as Chanakya did, but she keeps those hair untied because of the insults which are heaped on her. And the ash here refers to those insults only, the insults which are experienced by the expatriates on the daily basis. And here again we find going back to the roots, the theme of going back to the roots, when she says that in the earth where my umbilicus lies buried. because she feels as if the past still throbs in her, the same attachment, the same calling she gets from her homeland. Another poem is Letter to a Prospective Immigrant, which is written by Lakshmi Gill. It is a kind of a caution message to prepare the future immigrant. Lakshmi Gill talks about the struggles, and she wants that future immigrant to come prepared for the cold environment, to come prepared to face that discrimination and prejudice, the problems of adjustment. uh, the important thing, or a very specific thing about this poem, which I have quoted here. There are few lines from that same poem. Housewives are mad in league with perverse witches, cripples, and wild dogs. Make no mistake. So these lines are taken from the second stanza, where the poet says that she talks about the problems of adjustment, the adjustment which is demanded from a brown housewife with a white husband. Brown housewife, a woman from India. She is expected to fulfill all the commitments. She is expected to be always dedicated. The greatest challenge of a brown wife lies in her ability to articulate feelings and not cry about imaginary losses. So here the poet gives a reference, and this specific presentation of brown wife talks about the pains of a woman, which sometimes these male diasporic authors fail to feel and highlight. Another text which I have selected is a short story. It is also written by Lakshmi Gill. The name of the story is Altered Dreams. So it is a story of an Indian girl who had a dream to obtain a PhD, but she gets married to a man there in Canada, and after marriage again she starts to pursue her PhD. She wants to complete that. Even her parents come to live with her so that she can support her, so that they can look after her child, a small baby, so that the girl can get enough time to focus on the study. But this on the very last day of her coursework, the father of the girl dies, and the story ends here. Lakshmi Gill has not said anything about whether the girl could finish it or not, but on the very last day of her PhD coursework, her father dies. So the thing, or the theme which Lakshmi Gill has highlighted here, the woman from India, she is married to a man who himself is an academician, but yet he couldn't feel his wife's desire to learn, to study. Rather, he was very much occupied with his own career. He was very much concentrated on his own professional things. In fact, when the girl starts pursuing PhD, he threatens her. He says that he would divorce her if she continued to study. Another thing happens, the parents of that boy, that man, they also come forward, but not to support the daughter-in-law. They come forward to tell her to be a woman, stay inside the house, fulfill all the household duties, perform all the household duties, and let the man achieve success. Let the man grow because she is a woman. So here in this story, Lakshmi Gill, in this short story, she has exposed that the myth which normally people believe, a normal perception of ours is that in the Western countries everything is good, everyone is free to study, and all the women are given equal opportunities and equal chances. And Lakshmi Gill exposes that it is, as it is believed that it is all democratic and gender friendly outside there in Western countries in comparison to the third world, in comparison to the developing countries. But the reality is somewhat different. The things which are happening here, the sufferings of the women, those things exist in Western countries as well. So the story shows the prejudice against a migrant woman. A woman, a woman is told to be a homemaker only. A woman is told to stay back home and excuse me, to do the things which are meant for women. So the feminist perspective comes out very clearly through this story. The next text selected by me is the play by Uma Parmeswaran, Sons Must Die. It is set against the backdrop of Indo-Pak War of 1947-48. The play talks about the harms of the war. The story is told through three mothers. The playwright has deployed three mothers on the stage. Three mothers from three different regions of India, belonging to different religions. These three women show different perspectives towards war. Different women, different mothers behave differently in the same situation. The one mother is a Hindu woman from Kanyakumari. Her son is Hari. He is a pilot in Indian Air Force. He got injured during the war and died. Another woman, another mother, a Muslim woman, she had lost her husband and sons to this war. The names of her husband and the sons are not mentioned anywhere. And the third mother is from Punjab. Her son is a lieutenant. He also dies in that war. So I have quoted two dialogues from this same play. The one dialogue is spoken by the first mother who comes on the stage, Meenakshi. She is talking to her son and she says, "Shot away, broken. Child, was it for this you came here? So far from home, dearest boy. Oh, if I could do something to ease your pain." So this is the expression a mother shows when she sees that her son is dying in front of her because of a war. She feels that it is the beauty of Kashmir which has caused a war. Because the war was between India and Pakistan, and it was the time when there was a tribal revolt in Kashmir. After the independence, after the partition, there was a tribal revolt in Kashmir, and Pakistan came forward to support those tribals. This was the reason behind that war. So basically, in this play, Uma Parmeswaran, she shows that Kashmir is the reason for war. This region is the reason for war. So Meenakshi, who is from Kanyakumari, she considers the beauty of Kashmir a reason for war. She says that it is the beauty of this region which makes people fight with each other. So when she finds her son dying in front of her eyes, she says that it this beauty, is it this place for which you came here, which cost you your life? Another dialogue is from this. Another dialogue is spoken by the other mother, Prem Behan. She is a Punjabi woman. She says to her son, "You have done your duty. Go your duty to your land." So the difference is that when Meenakshi talks to her son Hari, and when she says that, is it this place for which you came here and you are giving your life, Hari says that it is something what I wanted to achieve. I wanted to touch the face of God, and I have touched that face here only, and I'm sacrificing my life for my nation. One way of looking at something, one perspective of looking at war. Another perspective, Nand, the son of Prem, he says that I do not want to die. I never wanted to be a hero. All I asked my land was to let me be a common man, live a common life. So, here, another man of the similar age, he doesn't want to die. And this is another view, another, a different perspective to look at something, to look at the war. And at the same time, we have two women looking at the war, perceiving the war, understanding the war, and presenting their views about the war. One woman regretting sending her son for that war, regretting allowing her son to go to Kashmir because her son is no more. Another woman is very much happy because she feels that it's a glorified death which her son has achieved. So here Uma Parmeswaran has shown two different views of two different women. Now, moving forward, Readly, I would like to talk about Bapsi Sidhwa as well. The very specific thing about these Parsi authors is that they illustrate and exemplify their Parsi community. And another important thing about Parsi community is that they imitate the colonizers. They talk about the revival of the past, and whatever diasporic writings are available, be that writing is by a male author or by a female, those writings talk about sense of insecurity, declining population, late marriages, high rate of divorce. These are the common themes which we always find in any Parsi diasporic writing or in any Parsi writing. But the important thing about An American Brat is that the novel is written by a woman, and here she looks at the things from a female perspective. It's a story of a 16-year-old girl who lives in Pakistan with her parents, and the name of the protagonist is Feroza. Feroza is living in Lahore with her parents, Zareen and Cyrus. So her mother feels that the girl is getting backward day by day. The girl is learning the ways of Muslims and she is behaving as the Muslims behave. So we should send her to America. There in America, uh, the girl's uncle is living, Manik. Eventually, they send her to America. She reaches there, she learns new ways, she adopts new culture, she becomes a kind of somewhat American brat, a kind of somewhat American girl. And after some time she falls in love with a Jew. The name of the boy is David. She falls in love with a Jew, a man who is not Parsi. So it is very typical of Parsi writings that they talk about mixed marriages and cultural clash. Here I would like to talk about the Parsi community. It is a community which does not allow interfaith marriages. In their tradition or in their religion, if you are not born a Parsi, you cannot become one. It's a non-proselytizing religion. They do not allow convergence. That is the reason why they do not allow interfaith marriages. So presently in Parsi community, there are two groups, and their priests, which are known as dasturs, the high priest. So there are two groups of dasturs. One section says that interfaith marriages should be allowed just to maintain the community or to maintain the population, and the other section, which is an orthodox one, that section says that interfaith marriages can't be allowed because this way we would impure our community. So the topic or the theme of mixed marriages is always there in any of the Parsi writings. So in this novel also, this theme is very much prevalent, a very strong theme. So when Feroza tells her parents that she wants to marry a Jew, she wants to marry David, the parents get worried, and there is a meeting where all the family members, even the members from the extended family, they also come to join that meeting, and they all discuss about that issue. And if finally they decide that Zareen, Feroza's mother, she would go to America. She would try to convince Feroza, and even and if she doesn't agree to Zareen, then she would try to bribe David so that he would leave their daughter. While that meeting was going on, now look at the dialogues. I have selected some of the dialogues. The very first dialogue is spoken by Manik. Manik, Feroza's uncle, the brother of Zareen. When Feroza goes to meet Manik and his Parsi wife, his wife Aban, though Manik had been living in America for long, but he marries a Parsi girl only from Pakistan. When Feroza goes to meet them, she tells him about David, and listening to all that, Manik says, "It all seems wonderful now, but marriage is something else. Our cultures are very different. Of course, I'm not saying it can't work, but you have to give it time." Means, in a way, Manik dissuades her from marrying a non-Parsi. But Feroza comes back, writes a letter to her parents, and when the meeting was going on, when the family members were discussing this issue of marriage, a young girl of around 15 to 16 years of age, Feroza's cousin, she says, "For God's sake, you are carrying on as if Feroza is dead. She's only getting married." So this dialogue highlights the view, the thinking style of the younger generation. They are open to interfaith marriages. Another dialogue. At the same time, this dialogue is spoken by the mother of that young girl. She says, "Don't you dare talk like that. One more peep out of you and I'll slap your face." The mother, representing the older generation, very much against the interfaith marriages. So this is the topic of concern about this Parsi community. Most of the Parsi authors talk about this feeling or this topic of concern or this issue of interfaith marriages. Even Rohinton Misri has highlighted this issue of interfaith marriages in some of his short stories and in one of his novels as well. And this issue of interfaith marriages has been talked in another novel that is Trying to Grow, written by Firdaus Kanga. And many of the Parsi novelists have talked about this issue. But the difference is that Bapsi Sidhwa has presented that issue from a female's perspective. What should be done and why it should be done. The, as I told you, the groups of dasturs or high priests have divided into two sections, and one is supporting interfaith marriages, the other one is against interfaith marriages. The one which is supporting the interfaith marriages, they are supporting the interfaith marriages of male Parsis only. Means they are allowing the boys to marry a non-Parsi, and they are ready to perform the Navjot ceremony of their children. Navjot is a ceremony in their religion, in their community, and in that some ceremony is a kind of formal induction into the religion. Without that ceremony, they believe that formally the child is not inducted into the religion. So they do not perform the Navjot ceremony of the children born of interfaith marriages, and the lenient section performs the Navjot ceremony of the children born from a Parsi father, even if the mother is a non-Parsi. But they do not perform the Navjot ceremony of the children from a Parsi mother if the father is a non-Parsi. So this is the perception which Bapsi Sidhwa has highlighted here. This is a female view of looking at the problem of their community, the female view of talking about interfaith marriages. If something is allowed for the males, that thing should be allowed for the females too. By the end of the novel, Feroza decide, though because of the intervention or because of the things which because of the situations created by Zareen, David goes back on his words and he refuses marrying Feroza. He goes away, and Zareen also feels very bad and sad for her daughter. She goes back to Pakistan. Feroza stays there in America and decides that she would marry a man of her choice, be him a Parsi or a non-Parsi. She also decides that if the people there in Lahore or Karachi, if they do not allow her to enter the fire temple, she would go to some other place, specifically Bombay, and she would pray there, a place where no one would know about her marriage. So this was the stand taken by Feroza by the end of the novel. She decides about her own life. She takes the decision of her own life. I feel that I have exceeded the given time limit. So the basic idea behind discussing these texts was that the diasporic women, they talk about the issues, the same issues which are talked about by the male diasporic authors, but these issues are dealt differently. These issues are dealt more tenderly. These issues are dealt in a totally different way, because literature has always been interpreted in different terms. And as we all know that there are two perspectives of looking at something, a male perspective and a female perspective. And these texts which I chose for today's discussion, these texts highlight the similar issues or the same problems which are or which have been talked about by many of the male authors, but the same problems are dealt in a new way, or the same problems are looked at from a different perspective. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sadaf ma'am. Thank you for covering so much areas, so much of aspects. Uh, uh, India has one of the world's most diverse and complex migration histories. And since the 19th century, ethnic Indians have established communities on every continent, if I'm not wrong, as well as on islands in the Caribbean and the Pacific and Indian Oceans. And
Yes.
in addition, ethnic Indians in countries like Kenya and Suriname, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, have migrated to
Yes.
other countries. A movement called secondary migration.
Secondary migration.
Yes, but it is hard to find writers from when we try to search from the secondary migration, and it may be the reason may be of the cultural identity, the loss of cultural identity. What are your views, ma'am?
These are the things which you have mentioned. Thank you so much for mentioning these things. And I had planned to cover up those things as well, but as you know, I was running short of the time, and I had exceeded the given time limit. And as you mentioned that the people who migrated from one place to other place, and then could you please repeat the question? I missed one part of that.
I was actually talking about that
Uh-huh.
secondary migration, and
Secondary migration.
it is when we go on to search for it, it is
Hmm.
hard to find writers from the part of that secondary migration. So, if you can throw some light on it, ma'am, it may be the reason may be the loss of cultural identity.
Okay, secondary migration. So the first thing I would like to tell you here, the poet that I chose for today's discussion, Lakshmi Gill. You can call it a kind of a case of secondary migration, because Lakshmi Gill, she is a Filipino. So, and we find that, or we can say that she had her roots there in India as well. How? Because her father was an Indian, mother was a Filipino. She came from Philippines to Canada. She had never been to India. Just before reaching to Canada, till then she had not been to Canada. But when she talks about the issues of migrants, when she writes this poem, and at the same time when she writes this story, Altered Dreams, so we find that she has she is talking about something as if she has experienced that, though she has not experienced those things. So even this secondary migration also somewhere links them with their roots. And at sometimes this secondary migration works differently as well, as you said that it takes away someone from their roots. It can work in both the ways.
Yes, ma'am. With your permission, can we take some questions from students too? I can find some students asking. Shabaz, if you can unmute your mic. Shabaz? Okay, he has typed his question. I'm reading it, ma'am. In your lecture, you once mentioned that the plight of women were previously projected through male diasporic writers, but recently South Asian women writers started speaking for themselves.
Yes.
Quite contrary, Ayn Rand in her novels, namely The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, created remarkable male characters like Howard Stower and Peter Keatings. So my question is, do we not always fail to portray the opposite sex?
uh, so his question is that do we let me read, do we or do we not always fail to portray the opposite sex? So as per my
Yes.
own perception, that when we portray something that we have experienced, that portrayal is truer to itself, is more near, is that kind of portrayal is nearer to the original picture. It is closer to the original picture. So that's why, as I had given you an example of Parsi community, Rohinton Misri also talks about interfaith marriages. He also highlights the same issue of interfaith marriages. He also favors that interfaith marriages should be allowed, but he looks at that kind of marriage from the perspective of a male character in one of his stories. Whereas Bapsi Sidhwa, she looks at the same thing from the perspective of a female character. The same issue of interfaith marriages, I am giving you this example to answer his question that if they fail to portray the opposite sex or not. The same issue has been highlighted by Sohrab Homi in one of his short stories. And there he, sorry, and there he has also favored that girls should also be allowed to marry outside the religion, or interfaith marriages should be allowed. But the intensity of presentation, the way Bapsi Sidhwa presents that concept is quite different from the way Saurabh Frases has presented that. I think I have cleared his doubt.
Yes, sir.
Saket, I think that we are quite late,
Yes.
and although I must have said it at the beginning also, but उस वक्त नहीं कहा, अच्छा नहीं लगा. It is quite a good time to say this, that Sadaf is not well, so we should cut short this question and answer session. Sadaf is suffering from problems. When we planned the lecture, she was quite okay, she was fine. But in between, she fell. She had a hairline crack in her hand, and I told her that we should cancel this or postpone this event. Then in the morning also, she was messaging me that she is having odd kind of symptoms. Even she said that मुझे डर लग रहा है, as if something abnormal is there. So I told her no, it is nothing of that sort. But still at that time I said कि हम लोग इसको off कर दें. She said no, we should go ahead. So that was the sheer professionalism that she has shown on her part, and we felt that she was quite not fine even during the course of her lecture also. So we should cut short the question and answer session. Thank you very much, Sadaf. Thank you very much for this well augmented, well argumented, and very well planned, neatly divided lecture. Thank you so much. And I also thank Harish Narang sir. It was a surprise, Sadaf. You didn't tell me that he is going to come. So it was a really sweet surprise. He left. I wanted कि वो कुछ कहते, but he left right after your lecture. So we are thankful to him also. We are thankful to the departmental colleagues. We are thankful to
Harish
our college
Narang sir is
colleagues,
here, sir.
other colleges, the teachers of other colleges who have joined us, and of course our very own students as well as the students of other colleges. So we are thankful to all of them. Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Sadaf, once again.
Thank you so much, Yahya sir.
Saket,
Yes, sir.